Welcome to The Secret of America. Tonight, we journey into the shadows of Virginia's past to examine a wedding celebration that evolved into one of the 19th century's most baffling enigmas. The account you're about to hear has been assembled from newspaper clippings, court testimonies, personal diaries, and whispered stories carried through generations. The Thorne family wedding represents a mystery that has resisted explanation for more than 100 years. A narrative where the boundary between recorded history and nightmare dissolves with each retelling. The setting was 1871. The Civil War had concluded merely 6 years earlier, leaving Virginia permanently transformed. The formerly proud Commonwealth continued to reel from battles' destruction, Richmond's burning, and the plantation economy's collapse that had for generations defined Southern aristocracy. Reconstruction policies had overturned social structures, generating friction between those welcoming the new arrangement and those tenaciously holding on to remnants of antebellum traditions. Railroad networks were spreading. Industry was gradually replacing agriculture as the economic foundation, and emancipated individuals were attempting to establish new lives amidst hostility and unpredictability. During this period of profound transformation, certain old Virginia families preserved their wealth and standing through flexibility, astute investments, or methods less honorable. The Thornes ranked among these survivors. Their wealth, initially established through tobacco and subsequently expanded into iron, timber, and railroad enterprises, had emerged from wartime diminished but far from annihilated. They belonged to that resilient Southern aristocratic class that yielded but didn't break beneath change's pressures. Among the rolling hills outside Millboro Springs, Virginia, stood Thorne Manor. The grand residence rose from the landscape as if declaring permanence itself. 3 stories of red brick with white columns and a curving driveway lined by ancient oaks whose spreading limbs created a natural arch for approaching carriages. The Thorne family had occupied this territory since before the Revolution. Their roots extended deep into Virginia soil. Their name appeared in county documents, church registries, and local memory across generations. They represented old money, the type that survived wars, economic downturns, and fortunes shifting currents through methods locals occasionally questioned in subdued tones. Strange lights observed at midnight from the manor's highest windows. Servants arriving healthy and robust only to deteriorate within months of employment. Livestock discovered drained of blood at neighboring farms with no predator tracks identifiable. These murmurs never escalated to accusations. The Thornes wielded too much power, too essential to the region's economy, yet they lingered like valley morning fog, intangible yet impossible to completely disregard. Ezekiel Thorne served as patriarch during 1871. At 57, he presented an imposing presence, tall and slender, with silver hair that had once been raven black, and eyes of such deep green they appeared almost black in certain illumination. A severe individual with reputation for business shrewdness and inflexible expectations for his family, Ezekiel had navigated Thorne Holdings through the tumultuous war years with calculated precision that impressed even his northern competitors. He had served briefly in the Confederate Army as colonel, more from obligation than conviction, and returned to civilian life sufficiently early to shield his assets from conflict's worst devastation. His wife Margaret had passed 3 winters earlier from consumption, leaving him to manage both his estate and 5 children alone. Those who had known Margaret characterized her as Ezekiel's temperamental opposite. Warm where he was cold, gentle where he was harsh, approachable where he was distant. Her death had created an emptiness at Thorne Manor that appeared to deepen rather than diminish over time. Servants whispered that the master had transformed following her passing, becoming more withdrawn, more preoccupied with his family's ancient history, and inclined to lock himself in the library for days accompanied only by brandy and peculiar leather-bound volumes. Ezekiel's eldest child was Evelyn Thorne. At 23, she was regarded by many as approaching spinsterhood, her marriage prospects diminishing with each passing season. This wasn't due to any lack of beauty. By all descriptions, Evelyn possessed the classical features distinguishing the Thorne lineage: prominent cheekbones, penetrating green eyes, and porcelain complexion. Her figure was slender yet graceful, her posture flawless from years of strict governesses who tolerated nothing less than perfection from Thorne daughters. Evelyn had received education far exceeding typical standards for young women of her era. Ezekiel, despite his traditional views in many matters, believed in developing intelligence in all his children. Regardless of gender, tutors from Boston and even Europe had been brought to Thorne Manor to instruct the Thorne offspring in literature, languages, mathematics, and natural philosophy. Evelyn had proven an eager and capable student, developing particularly strong interests in botany and astronomy, interests that would later feature significantly in subsequent events. Some claimed it was her temperament that discouraged suitors, a certain independent streak, tendency to speak her mind when convention demanded quiet submission, unsettling habit of staring into space as if perceiving things invisible to others. Others whispered it was her father's intimidating presence. Few knew the actual reason was Evelyn's secret attachment to a man her father would never sanction. James Sullivan was the son of Irish immigrants who had come to Virginia seeking work following the potato famine. His family had arrived in America possessing nothing beyond the clothing they wore and desperate determination to survive. Thomas Sullivan, James' father, had found employment at Thorne Iron Works, advancing quickly from general laborer to skilled craftsman due to metalworking abilities transmitted through generations of his family in County Cork. The Sullivans had settled in the modest worker housing in Millborough Springs. Their lives defined by hard work, Catholic devotion, and the close bonds of the small Irish community that had developed around industrial operations. James had grown up alongside the Thorne children, though always separated by the invisible yet impenetrable barrier of class. As a boy, he would occasionally glimpse the Thorne offspring during community events or church services. The Catholic Sullivans attending St. Mary's while the Episcopal Thornes worshipped at Christ Church, their paths intersecting only in the neutral territory of town festivals or Independence Day celebrations. He possessed rugged handsomeness, with the broad shoulders and powerful build of someone accustomed to physical labor. His hands were calloused from years of work, first assisting his father at the forge and later independently as he developed his skills. Unlike many of his peers, James possessed a quick mind and natural aptitude for figures and mechanical principles. These qualities had enabled him to rise to foreman at Thorne Iron Works by age 26, an achievement unprecedented for an Irish immigrant son in post-war Virginia. Education had come to James through less conventional channels than Evelyn's privileged tutoring. His mother, Bridget Sullivan, had been a school teacher in Ireland before famine forced their immigration. Evenings by lamplight in their modest home, she had taught James and his 3 younger siblings to read, write, and calculate with thoroughness surpassing many formal schools of the period. This foundation, combined with James' voracious appetite for knowledge, led him to spend his rare free hours reading borrowed books on engineering, metallurgy, and business principles, subjects that would serve him well as he advanced at the ironworks. Evelyn and James had met accidentally during one of her botanical expeditions along Chestnut Creek, which wound through Thorne property before joining the Jackson River eastward. The spring of 1869 had been unusually wet, the creek swollen with rainwater and moving with dangerous speed. Evelyn, focused on examining a rare orchid species she had spotted on a previous excursion, had ventured too close to the undermined bank. She had slipped on mossy stones and would have been swept into the rushing current had James not happened upon the scene at that precise moment. He had been checking water levels for iron works operations upstream when he heard her startled cry. Without hesitation, he had lunged forward, catching her arm and pulling her to safety with strength that both impressed and startled her. That moment of contact, his strong hand steadying her, their eyes meeting in surprise and then something more, had ignited a fire that burned secretly for nearly 2 years. Evelyn had been raised to view men like James as beneath her station, suitable as employees but never as equals or, heaven forbid, suitors. Yet something in his direct gaze, the quiet confidence with which he had ensured her safety without condescension or expectation of gratitude, had challenged everything she had been taught about class distinctions. For James' part, the encounter had been equally transformative. He had grown up seeing the Thorne family as remote figures, wealthy, powerful, and as distant as stars in the night sky. Evelyn had been a name, occasionally glimpsed at church or town functions, but never a real person in his mind. That day by the creek, as he helped her gather the botanical specimens she had dropped during her near fall, listening to her speak with genuine passion about regional flora, he had seen past the Thorne name to the woman herself, intelligent, curious, and surprisingly lacking the haughty condescension he had expected from someone of her background. Their secret courtship had progressed through stolen moments. Notes passed through trusted servants, brief encounters at the town bookshop where Evelyn would linger over botanical texts while James pretended interest in agricultural manuals, and occasional twilight meetings at the Thorne property edge, chaperoned only by whippoorwills and fireflies. They discovered shared interests beyond what either would have predicted. Mutual fascination with the natural world, with mechanical innovations featured in scientific journals, with poetry addressing America's changing landscape. It was a courtship conducted entirely in whispers and glances, in words written and burned, in the language of restraint that only intensified their connection's strength. They both recognized their situation's impossibility within 1870s Virginia social context. Yet neither could bring themselves to end what had become essential to their happiness. During one such meeting on a warm evening in early June 1871, James had finally voiced what had been growing between them for months. The setting sun had painted the western sky in amber and rose hues, casting long shadows across the wildflower meadow where they had arranged to meet. Evelyn had arrived breathless, having slipped away from dinner with her father's business associates by pleading a headache. James had been waiting with a small volume of Wordsworth's poetry, a shared favorite, and a wild determination born of weeks of internal debate. When she appeared through the trees, her dark hair slightly disheveled from her hurried journey, he had known with sudden clarity that he could no longer pretend their relationship could exist indefinitely in this twilight state of neither acknowledged nor denied. He had knelt in the soft grass and asked for Evelyn's hand, offering not a ring. He could afford nothing worthy of a Thorne, but a promise to spend his life ensuring she never regretted choosing love over luxury, connection over convention. She had accepted without hesitation, her heart overriding the rational part of her mind that knew the storm this would bring. And storm it did. When Evelyn, summoning courage she hadn't known she possessed, announced her intention to marry James Sullivan, Ezekiel Thorne had initially frozen in disbelief. The library where this confrontation occurred fell so silent that the grandfather clock's ticking seemed to echo like thunder. Then, as the full import of his daughter's declaration registered, Ezekiel's famous temper had erupted with volcanic force. Thorne Manor's walls had trembled with his fury. No daughter of his would marry beneath her station. No Thorne would dilute their bloodline with the son of penniless immigrants. He had hurled accusations of ingratitude, mental instability, even demonic influence that would have been laughable in a less fraught context. Servants found excuses to be anywhere but within earshot of the library, though Ezekiel's rage's volume made complete avoidance impossible. Evelyn had stood her ground with firmness that surprised even herself, perhaps the first time in her life she had directly opposed her father's will. "I love him," she had stated simply, as if those 3 words could bridge the chasm of class, expectation, and family obligation separating her from her heart's desire. "Love," Ezekiel had scoffed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper more terrifying than his shouts. "What does a girl of your sheltered existence know of love? This is infatuation, a common working man's manipulation of an inexperienced mind. I've seen his type before, ambitious, reaching above his station, seeing in you not a woman to cherish but a path to fortune and position." The argument had continued for hours, spiraling through accusations, pleas, threats, and finally a terrible silence when Ezekiel had declared she was no daughter of his if she pursued this madness. He had ordered her to her room, proclaiming she would remain there until this fever breaks and sanity returns. With meals delivered by the housekeeper and no outside contact permitted for 3 days, Evelyn had remained in this state of genteel imprisonment, alternating between tears, rage, and deepening resolve. She had begun planning an elopement, going so far as to pack a small bag with essential items and write letters to her siblings explaining her decision. On the 4th morning, as she considered how to smuggle a message to James, a knock had come at her bedroom door. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, a thin, perpetually worried woman who had served the Thorns for over 20 years, had entered with a breakfast tray and an unexpected message. Ezekiel requested his daughter's presence in the library at her earliest convenience. The older woman's expression had revealed nothing, but the slight tremor in her hands as she set down the tray suggested something unusual in the master's demeanor. Evelyn had dressed carefully, steeling herself for another confrontation. She descended the grand staircase with measured steps, her mind racing through arguments she might present, counterpoints to her father's inevitable objections. The heavy mahogany library door had seemed more imposing than ever as she raised her hand to knock. What happened next was something no one in Virginia society had anticipated. After a night locked in his study, emerging only to demand brandy from his terrified servants, Ezekiel Thorne had emerged the following morning with an announcement that shocked the household. The wedding would proceed with his blessing. More shocking still were the details. The ceremony would take place at Thorne Manor itself, not in the small family chapel on the grounds as was tradition, but in the grand ballroom that had not been used since before the war. The guest list would include not only Virginia society's upper echelons but also the Sullivan family and their associates. No expense would be spared. It would be, Ezekiel declared, a wedding to remember for generations. The abrupt reversal confounded everyone, none more so than Evelyn herself. When she cautiously questioned her father, he merely patted her hand with uncharacteristic gentleness and said, "Family traditions must be honored, my dear. Some things are more important than personal feelings." His eyes, as he spoke these words, had held an unusual gleam, not anger or resignation, but something akin to anticipation, even triumph. This cryptic statement might have caused more concern had Evelyn not been so relieved. Whatever had changed her father's mind was a blessing, as far as she was concerned. The following weeks were a flurry of preparations. Invitations were dispatched to over 100 guests, their cream parchment emblazoned with the Thorne family crest, a thorny branch encircling a single eye. Seamstresses from Richmond were summoned to create Evelyn's gown of ivory silk and chantilly lace, working to a design Ezekiel himself had sketched with surprising attention to detail. Richmond's finest caterers were commissioned to prepare a feast worthy of royalty. Throughout this period, Ezekiel displayed a level of involvement in wedding arrangements that bewildered the household. This was a man who had previously considered such matters beneath his notice. Yet suddenly he had opinions on everything from floral arrangements to the ceremony's precise timing. He insisted the wedding must take place at sunset on October 15th, a date holding no obvious significance but which he declared auspicious for a Thorne bride. Most peculiar was his insistence on personally reviewing the guest list multiple times, adding names of distant acquaintances and even people with whom the Thornes had historically experienced strained relations. When the final count reached 108 invitees, an unusually specific number, he had nodded with satisfaction and ordered that no further additions or subtractions be made, regardless of circumstance. The Sullivans, meanwhile, regarded this turn of events with cautious optimism tinged with disbelief. The wedding invitation delivered by Ezekiel's personal secretary rather than through the mail had struck Thomas and Bridget Sullivan like a thunderbolt from clear sky. They had been prepared to lose their son to elopement and subsequent ostracism, perhaps even to violence given Ezekiel Thorne's fearsome reputation. This apparent acceptance was so unexpected that their first reaction had been suspicion. James's mother, Bridget, crossed herself whenever Ezekiel's name was mentioned and whispered prayers in Gaelic when she thought no one was listening. A deeply superstitious woman whose childhood in rural Ireland had been steeped in folk beliefs and cautionary tales. She sensed something amiss in this sudden reversal. "There's an ill wind behind this change of heart," she warned her son. "The thorns have never embraced our kind without purpose, and rarely for good." His father, Thomas, was equally wary, though more pragmatic in his concerns. A man who had survived famine, crossing the Atlantic in a disease-ridden ship, and the prejudices faced by Irish immigrants in America, Thomas Sullivan had developed a finely honed sense for detecting threats to his family's welfare. "Men like Thorne don't change their minds without reason," he counseled his son one evening as they sat on their modest home's porch, "and rarely for good ones. Whatever blessing he's offering comes with a price not yet named." James acknowledged his parents' wisdom but was too deeply in love to heed the warning signs. His focus was on the future, a future with Evelyn unimaginable just weeks before yet now apparently within reach. When Ezekiel offered him a position managing the Thorne business's western expansion after the wedding, a position that would provide wealth and status beyond anything the Sullivans had known, James interpreted it as a peace offering, a chance to prove his worth to his future father-in-law. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and subtle tensions. Evelyn and James managed only a handful of proper meetings, always chaperoned by Evelyn's younger sister, Charlotte, or by Mrs. Winters. During these brief encounters, they spoke of their future plans, where they would live. Ezekiel had offered them use of a smaller house on Thorne property. James's new position. Evelyn's hope to establish a conservatory for her botanical studies. If James noticed a certain distraction in Evelyn's manner, a tendency to fall silent mid-sentence and stare into the middle distance, he attributed it to the natural nervousness of a bride approaching her wedding day. What he couldn't know was that Evelyn's distraction stemmed from increasingly disturbing dreams plaguing her nights. Dreams of standing at the altar in a gown that constricted like a snake with each breath. Of guests whose faces shifted and blurred when she tried to focus on them. Of her father standing behind her groom with an ancient knife raised high. She dismissed these nightmares as wedding anxiety, though a part of her wondered if they might be her subconscious expressing doubts about her father's too convenient change of heart. As the wedding day approached, strange occurrences began plaguing Thorne Manor with increasing frequency. Servants reported hearing whispers in empty rooms, not the usual creaks and settlements of an old house, but distinct voices speaking words just below comprehension threshold. Objects disappeared only to reappear in unexpected places. Evelyn's mother's cameo found in the garden when it should have been locked in a jewelry box. A silver candlestick from the dining room discovered in the attic. Ezekiel's pocket watch located in the hollow of an oak tree half a mile from the house. Most disturbing was an incident involving the Thorne family portrait gallery. This long hallway on the second floor contained paintings of Thorne ancestors dating back to the family's Virginia arrival. At the center, larger than the others, hung the imposing figure of Ezekiel's grandfather, Josiah Thorne, the man who had expanded family holdings from a modest tobacco plantation to the diverse business empire it had become. One morning, a scullery maid entering to dust found this portrait slashed from frame to base, the canvas hanging in tatters as if attacked by a wild animal. No one admitted to entering the gallery during the night, and the doors had been locked as usual, the key in Mrs. Winters' possession. Ezekiel's reaction to the vandalism had been unexpectedly calm. Rather than the rage the household had braced for, he had merely nodded as if confirming something long suspected and ordered the damaged painting removed. "It seems grandfather disapproves of the match," he had remarked cryptically, then added with a cold smile, "but his time has passed. The future belongs to the living." Most disturbing were the dreams afflicting not just Evelyn but everyone residing in Thorne Manor. As the wedding day drew closer, every household member, from the lowest scullery maid to Evelyn herself, reported nightmares of standing in the manor's ballroom, surrounded by wedding guests who melted like candle wax before their eyes, their features running in rivulets of flesh to reveal something inhuman beneath. Some dreamed of a door appearing in the empty ballroom center, opening onto darkness filled with reaching hands. Others described a green light pouring through windows, turning everything it touched to ash. Many awoke screaming, sheets soaked with sweat despite the autumn chill. 2 housemaids gave notice, preferring unemployment to another night under the thorn roof. The stable master reported that horses had become increasingly agitated, refusing to enter certain stable parts and sometimes rearing in terror at nothing visible to human eyes. Evelyn dismissed these incidents as nerves, the natural anxieties preceding any significant life change amplified by household staff's superstitious nature. Her siblings were less certain. 16-year-old William, the youngest Thorne, became so troubled that he begged Evelyn to elope instead. "There's something wrong with father," he insisted during a private garden moment. "Haven't you noticed how he stares at that old book from the attic? How he mutters to himself when he thinks no one's listening? Last night I heard him in the library. He wasn't alone. Evelyn, he was speaking to someone, but when I looked through the keyhole, there was no one else in the room." Charlotte, 19 and closest to Evelyn in both age and temperament, reported similar concerns. "He's been visiting the family crypt at midnight," she whispered one afternoon as they sorted wedding gifts. "I saw him from my window. He carried no lamp, yet moved as if he could see perfectly in darkness, and he was carrying something, a bundle wrapped in cloth that moved." The middle children, twins Henry and Eleanor, age 21, added their own observations. Eleanor had found strange symbols chalked on furniture undersides in the ballroom, while Henry had discovered a locked room in the cellar that had never existed before, its door warm to the touch despite the underground chill. But Evelyn was determined to see her wedding day come to pass. After years of believing her love for James would never be sanctioned, she would not be deterred by superstition and childish fears. She attributed the household's collective unease to routine disruption. Her father's uncharacteristic behavior to the natural emotion of a man preparing to give away his eldest daughter. When her siblings pressed their concerns, she reminded them of the opportunities this marriage would bring, not just for her, but for James and by extension a working-class Irish family that had never dreamed of such advancement. In private moments, however, even Evelyn could not entirely dismiss a growing sense of wrongness. The way her father watched her now, not with the expected mixture of pride and resignation, but with a calculating assessment that made her feel less like a bride and more like a prized heifer being readied for market. The strange emphasis he placed on specific ceremony details, particularly vows timing and guest positioning in the ballroom. His new habit of measuring her with his eyes, as if confirming she matched some internal specification. These doubts she kept to herself, sharing them neither with James nor with her siblings. Too much depended on this wedding proceeding as planned. Too many hopes, too many futures. If the price of her happiness was enduring a few weeks of strangeness and unsettling dreams, it seemed a small cost to bear. The wedding day dawned crisp and clear. October 15, 1871. The trees surrounding Thorne Manor blazed with autumn color, crimson, amber, and burnished gold. Inside, the house had been transformed. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. Roses, chrysanthemums, and dahlia blossoms arranged in artful displays. Hundreds of candles waited to be lit as evening approached, promising to bathe proceedings in golden light. The household had been awake since before dawn, servants moving with well-drilled military precision despite dark circles beneath many eyes testifying to another night of troubled sleep. The ballroom, unused for years, had been restored to former glory. The parquet floor gleamed from hours of polishing. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, each prism casting rainbow reflections across walls freshly painted in cream and gold. Long windows occupying nearly the entire eastern wall would capture the setting sun perfectly as the ceremony began. Evelyn awoke feeling strangely calm. The previous week's anxieties replaced by dreamlike acceptance. Her sisters and 2 cousins who had arrived the day before helped her prepare, their chatter filling her bedchamber with welcome normalcy. Her wedding gown, when finally donned, proved more beautiful than she had dared hope. The silk shimmering like captured moonlight, the lace overlay delicate as spun frost, tiny seed pearls catching light with every movement. Downstairs, Ezekiel moved through the house with unusual energy for a man his age, personally inspecting every arrangement, adjusting ballroom chair positions by mere inches, ensuring each candle stood at precisely the right height. He had dressed with particular care in a suit of such deep black it seemed to absorb light, a blood-red waistcoat providing the only color touch. The family signet ring, normally worn on his right hand, had been moved to his left, a detail noticed by Mrs. Winters with quiet concern but not remarked upon. Guests began arriving at 3. Carriages lined the winding drive as far as I could see, disgorging Virginia's elite in their finest attire. The Thornton family from Charlottesville, old money with Revolutionary War connections. The Westfields from Richmond, banking magnates whose influence extended to Washington. The Blackwoods from Lexington, whose timber operations rivaled the Thorns' own. Even Governor Gilbert Walker made an appearance, testament to Thorn family influence despite their Confederate affiliations during the recent conflict. Each arrival was greeted at the door by Ezekiel himself rather than the butler as would be customary. Another protocol departure raising eyebrows but attributed to a father's pride on his daughter's wedding day. Each guest was personally escorted to a specific ballroom seat, Ezekiel consulting a small notebook to ensure precise placement. When several guests attempted to change seats to sit near friends, Ezekiel intervened with firm insistence on the arranged order, citing acoustics and family tradition in a tone brooking no argument. The Sullivan contingent arrived together at 4, dressed in their finest clothes, though these were visibly simpler than upper-class guests' elaborate fashions. Thomas Sullivan wore a new suit purchased specially for the occasion, the stiff collar clearly uncomfortable against his weathered neck. Bridget had chosen a deep blue dress complementing her still dark hair, touched only lightly with silver at temples. James's 3 younger siblings followed, wide-eyed at surrounding opulence. Most notable was Bridget's demeanor as she crossed Thorn Manor's threshold. She clutched a rosary in her hand, her lips moving in silent prayer. When Ezekiel stepped forward to greet them, she made the sign of the cross before offering her hand, a gesture causing amusement ripples among some Virginia gentry but received by Ezekiel with an understanding nod, as if he recognized the protective intention behind the motion. "Welcome to our family, Mrs. Sullivan," he said with unexpected warmth. "Your son will make my Evelyn very happy, I'm certain." "If God wills it," Bridget responded, her Irish accent stronger than usual, betraying her nervousness. "Indeed," Ezekiel replied, a strange smile playing at his mouth corners, though some might say we make our own fate in this world. He placed the Sullivans in the front row on the aisle's right side, a position of honor surprising everyone, especially Thomas Sullivan, who had expected relegation to the room's back. James had arrived separately and earlier, sequestered in a small study off the main hallway where his groomsmen, 2 fellow Iron Works employees who looked profoundly uncomfortable in formal attire, attempted to calm his nerves with awkward jokes and a surreptitiously passed whiskey flask. By 5, all 108 guests were assembled. The ceremony was to take place in the Manor's grand ballroom, where an archway had been constructed and decorated with white roses and trailing ivy. Chairs arranged in neat rows faced the makeshift altar, where Reverend Thomas Holloway from Millborough Springs Episcopal Church waited to perform the ceremony. A tall, thin man with perpetual mild surprise expression. Reverend Holloway had been ministering to the Thorn family for over a decade, baptizing younger children and burying Margaret Thorn 3 years prior. The Reverend had expressed initial reservations about performing a ceremony between an Episcopalian bride and Catholic groom, but had been persuaded by Ezekiel's assurance that the Sullivans had consented to an Episcopal service. This was not entirely true. James had agreed, but Bridget had protested until Thomas had gently reminded her they were in no position to dictate terms. "The girl's a thorn," he had said. "If James wants her, he'll have to bend more than his knee." As 5:30 approached, a curious phenomenon occurred that would later be noted in multiple witness accounts. The ballroom's light quality began subtly changing. The late afternoon sun streaming through tall eastern windows took on a golden hue more intense than natural, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Several guests commented on the effect, assuming it was some clever mirror or colored glass arrangement intended as decorative element. Ezekiel Thorne moved among his guests with uncharacteristic charm, a smile fixed upon his usually stern face. He personally greeted each attendee, clasping hands and thanking them for sharing in this momentous occasion. Those knowing him well noted something unusual in his manner, a feverish quality to his eyes, slight hand tremor, but attributed it to natural paternal emotion on daughter's wedding day. More observant guests might have noticed he spent slightly longer with certain attendees, particularly those seated at specific ballroom points, the four corners, each row's center, and every seventh front row seat. To these individuals, he offered not just greetings but a small token, a sprig of unfamiliar herb with tiny white flowers, which he instructed them to keep on their person throughout the ceremony. "An old family tradition," he explained, "for luck and prosperity." At precisely 5:30, the string quartet positioned in a ballroom corner began playing Mendelssohn's Wedding March. Guests settled into seats, necks craning for first bride glimpse. James stood at the altar, resplendent in a new charcoal gray suit, his usual workman's stubble replaced by clean-shaven jawline, his dark hair tamed with pomade into uncharacteristically smooth style. His expression mixed nervousness and undisguised joy, his eyes fixed on ballroom's double doors. Music swelled, and those doors swung open to reveal Evelyn in the doorway on her father's arm. A collective gasp rose from assembled guests. Her gown was more exquisite than rumor suggested, the bodice adorned with seed pearls catching light with every movement, the skirt falling in perfect folds to brush floor as she moved. Her dark hair arranged in elaborate coiffure, topped with orange blossom crown and trailing delicate lace veil partially obscuring her features but unable to hide her radiant smile. She was in that moment the very picture of a Victorian bride, beautiful, demure, and radiantly happy. Yet those nearest the aisle, particularly those with keener perception, might have noticed something else beneath conventional bridal glow, a certain gaze fixity, almost trance-like, as if she walked in dream rather than being fully present in the moment. As father and daughter processed down the aisle, observers noted Ezekiel's expression. Where one might expect pride or even resigned acceptance, there appeared instead intense satisfaction, almost triumph. His spine stood straighter than usual, his step more vigorous, as if the ceremony infused him with energy rather than marking the bittersweet transition of releasing beloved child to new life. When they reached the altar and Reverend Holloway asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Ezekiel's voice rang with unusual force, "I do, with the blessings of all who came before me." The phrasing caused the Reverend momentary confusion blink, the traditional response being simply, "I do," or, "Her mother and I do." But he recovered quickly and proceeded with ceremony as planned. As Ezekiel took his front row seat, several guests would later recall that he removed a small book from his pocket and placed it on his lap, his fingers resting on its worn leather cover throughout proceedings. Those closest might have noticed the book bore no title, its binding unusually ancient, leather discolored with age, and what appeared darker stains along the spine. The ceremony proceeded according to tradition. Reverend Holloway's voice rang clearly through the ballroom as he spoke of marriage sanctity, husband and wife responsibilities, divine blessing bestowed upon this sacred union. Scriptures were read, passages from Genesis, Corinthians, and Psalms accompanying Christian weddings for centuries. When vow exchange time came, James spoke his with clear confidence, his Irish accent more pronounced than usual under stress of moment, but his meaning unmistakable, to love, honor, and cherish Evelyn for all his life days. As he spoke, his gaze never left her face. His expression showed wonder that such happiness could be his. Evelyn's response was equally clear, though delivered in softer voice, nevertheless carrying to farthest ballroom corners. Those knowing her well might have detected slight hesitation before certain phrases, particularly, "till death do us part," but attributed this to natural emotion rather than deeper significance. Rings were presented, simple gold bands James had purchased with months of saved wages, though Ezekiel had offered something more elaborate. "Let what binds them be bought with his own hands," he had said, an unusually poetic sentiment from a man typically concerned with material displays. As rings were blessed and exchanged, another subtle change occurred in ballroom atmosphere. The golden window light deepened, taking on amber hue, gradually shifting toward something less natural, a green tinge, slight at first but growing more pronounced each minute. Again, guests assumed this was intentional effect, perhaps from colored lanterns being lit outside as sun began setting. Finally, after final prayer spoken and final blessing bestowed, Reverend Holloway pronounced them man and wife. "You may now kiss your bride," the Reverend instructed with benevolent smile. James took Evelyn's hands in his. For a moment they simply gazed at one another, scarcely believing they had reached this point against all odds. Then slowly he leaned forward to claim his first kiss as her husband. Their lips met as last sunlight rays streamed through high ballroom windows, bathing newlyweds in light now undeniably shifted from golden to pale luminous green. The moment should have been perfect, the culmination of a love story overcoming substantial obstacles. Instead, it marked the beginning of a mystery that would never be solved. As their kiss lingered, room light quality continued changing. What had been golden became increasingly alien, a greenish hue casting sickly shadows across guest faces. A low humming filled air, barely perceptible at first but growing steadily louder until it seemed to vibrate through floorboards into everyone present's bones. Evelyn was first to notice something wrong. Breaking from James, she turned toward assembled guests with alarm. What she saw defied explanation. Every room occupant, from highest lady to lowliest servant standing at back, appeared frozen in place. Their expressions locked in polite smiles and tender gazes of moments before, but their eyes were wide with dawning horror. Ezekiel alone seemed unaffected. He had risen from his seat, the strange leather-bound book now open in his hands, his lips moving in apparent recitation though no sound emerged over increasing hum filling the room. "Father." Evelyn's voice was barely audible above noise. "What's happening? What have you done?" Before Ezekiel could respond, if indeed he intended to, the humming reached crescendo. The green light pulsed once, twice, then flared with blinding intensity. Several guests managed to break from paralysis enough to scream, sounds cutting through hum like knives through silk. Before anyone could speak or move further, a cold wind swept through ballroom though all windows and doors remained closed. Candles flickered wildly, then extinguished all at once, plunging space into premature darkness broken only by unnatural green glow emanating from air itself. In chaotic minutes following, James held tightly to Evelyn's hand, refusing separation from his new bride despite panicked crowd. He tried pulling her toward exit, but she resisted, her eyes fixed on her father who now stood with arms outstretched, book hovering before him without visible support. Its pages turning of their own accord. "We need to get out of here," James urged, tugging her hand with increasing desperation. "We can't leave them," Evelyn protested, gesturing to guests caught between paralysis and panic, some frozen completely while others moved in slow motion as if struggling against invisible bonds. Then, in a moment haunting James Sullivan for life's remainder, he saw something impossible. At Ballroom Center, directly beneath largest chandelier, the air itself appeared to tear open. There was no other way to describe it, a vertical reality split widening to reveal not wall behind it but darkness so profound it seemed to absorb greenish light rather than be illuminated by it. From this darkness emerged something. Later, in nightmares plaguing him for decades, James would never exactly describe what he had seen. His mind, as human minds will, had translated incomprehensible into more familiar terms, reaching hands, hungry mouths, eyes that weren't eyes but served same function. The impression was of hunger, of ancient patience finally rewarded, of bargain reaching fruition. Ezekiel's voice rose above scream cacophony and omnipresent humming, speaking words in no language James recognized. In response, reality tear widened further. What happened next occurred with such speed that witnesses would later contradict not only each other but themselves attempting description. The green light intensified unbearably. Reality tear expanded until it seemed to touch ballroom walls on either side. Ezekiel Thorne shouted a final phrase ending in his daughter's name. And then, in an instant stretching like eternity, every ballroom guest began to move, not of their own volition but as if pulled by irresistible force. They slid across polished floor toward central tear, their heels leaving scuff marks on perfect parquet, their hands grasping uselessly at empty air. Some went silently, eyes wide with terror beyond screaming. Others fought to last, their cries cutting off abruptly as they reached impossible doorway threshold and vanished into darkness beyond. Ezekiel himself was last to go. But unlike others, he stepped willingly into void, book clutched to chest, ecstatic fulfillment expression on face as darkness enveloped him. Before James could fully comprehend witnessing, the tear contracted with blink suddenness. Green light vanished. Humming ceased. Candles reignited. All at once, casting normal golden light across ballroom now empty save for James, Evelyn, and handful of servants who had been outside room when whatever occurred took place. Servants rushed in with oil lamps, faces pale with fright as they took in scene, a ballroom set for wedding reception with chairs overturned, personal items scattered across floor, fans, handkerchiefs, pocket watches dropped in panic, but not one of 108 wedding guests in sight. As light gradually returned, impossible scene revealed itself in full horror. Ballroom was empty, save for James, Evelyn, and servants from other house parts. All 108 wedding guests had vanished without trace. No doors opened. No windows disturbed. Yet entire assembly, including Ezekiel Thorne himself, had disappeared as completely as if they had never existed. Initial reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by panic. Remaining servants, along with James and Evelyn, searched every vast manor room. They called names into empty corridors, flung open closet doors, even checked cellars and attics. As night fell in earnest, they extended search to grounds, carrying lanterns through gardens, orchards, woods beyond. Not a single guest was found, not a footprint in soft garden path earth, not a snapped twig along forest trails, not one witness having seen over 100 people leave property. By midnight, James had sent riders for Millborough Springs Sheriff and to alert neighboring farms and estates. The sheriff, a practical man named Joseph Bennett who had held position 15 years, arrived shortly after 1 in morning accompanied by 2 deputies. His initial skepticism, assuming elaborate prank or perhaps mass departure protesting mixed-class marriage, gave way to genuine concern as facts became clear. "You're telling me over 100 people just vanished?" he asked James, expression caught between disbelief and growing alarm. "I know how it sounds," James replied, voice hoarse from hours shouting names into darkness. "But I swear on my mother's life, Sheriff. 1 minute they were there, next they were gone." Sheriff's investigation that night revealed nothing beyond already apparent. Chairs overturned in haste, personal belongings abandoned, and series of scuff marks across ballroom floor converging at central point before stopping abruptly. Most disturbing was that central point condition, a circular area approximately 6 feet diameter where previously immaculate parquet was now discolored and warped. The wood blackened as if exposed to intense heat, though no fire reported. By dawn, formal search had been organized involving every able-bodied man from surrounding areas. For 3 days they combed countryside, dragged Chestnut Creek, and investigated every abandoned building, mine shaft, and cave within 10 miles of Thorn Manor. Nothing. No one. The Thorne-Sullivan wedding guests had simply ceased to exist. In weeks following, theories abounded. Some suggested mass hallucination, perhaps something in wedding feast caused collective delusions. But servants consuming same food remained unaffected. Others whispered of secret passages within old house, planned disappearance orchestrated by Ezekiel Thorne for unknown reasons. More superstitious spoke of divine punishment, deals with devil, ancient curses awakened by mixing bloods that should have remained separate. Prevailing theory among more rational minds centered on kidnapping, elaborate plot to abduct wealthy Virginia society members for ransom. This theory gained traction when days passed without ransom demands, forcing authorities to consider grim possibility of mass murder instead. Yet no bodies found, no blood evidence discovered despite thorough manner and grounds examination. Investigation eventually expanded to include Richmond authorities and even federal agents intrigued by case's unprecedented nature. They interviewed everyone connected to event, dressmaker fitting Evelyn's gown, florist providing arrangements, merchant supplying feast. They exhaustively studied guest list, tracking each missing person's background, searching for connections beyond obvious social ties. One agent became particularly interested in Ezekiel Thorne's activities during wedding preceding weeks, a methodical man named Frederick Harrison with financial crimes investigation experience. Agent Harrison approached case from angle others overlooked rather than focusing solely on disappearance itself. He began examining Ezekiel's business dealings, correspondence, personal history. Interviews with Thorne's business associates revealed unusual transactions, significant asset liquidation, property deed transfers, all outstanding debt settlements. It appeared Ezekiel had been preparing for something momentous, putting affairs in order with meticulous care. Most telling was discovery made in Ezekiel's study during second, more thorough manner search, a hidden compartment behind false fireplace mantel panel containing documents painting disturbing picture. Letters exchanged with obscure European and Egyptian scholars. Astronomical charts marking specific star and planet alignments with October 15, 1871 circled in red ink. Genealogical records of Thorne family stretching centuries with certain marriages marked by strange symbols. And most disturbing of all, a leather-bound volume written in language none could identify, filled with astronomical alignment diagrams and anatomical drawings disturbing even hardened investigators. The book appeared ancient, its pages made of material experts couldn't conclusively identify. Not quite parchment, not quite paper, with unsettling texture one scholar described as too similar to human skin for comfort. Tucked between pages was Thorne lineage family tree dating to early 1600s. Beside Evelyn's name, notation in Ezekiel's handwriting, the 100th bride. The circle closes. What this meant, none could determine. Book was sent to various university scholars, but none could translate text or make sense of diagrams. Eventually, like missing guests themselves, the volume disappeared from locked Richmond evidence room, furthering inexplicable mystery aura surrounding case. For James and Evelyn, wedding aftermath was devastating. Their joy had turned to horror, their future suddenly uncertain. Evelyn was particularly affected by father's disappearance. Despite initial marriage opposition, he remained her father. Thought he might have orchestrated something sinister was too painful to consider. Yet evidence increasingly pointed that direction. Evelyn withdrew into herself during weeks following incident. She would sit for hours in father's study, surrounded by his books, as if trying to piece together from possessions the truth of what occurred. She began collecting all Thorne family history references she could find, creating event timelines stretching to family's Virginia arrival. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. The Thornes had not come to America as successful merchants family lore suggested. According to English parish records obtained through London historian correspondence, first Thorne to set foot in colonies had fled under suspicious circumstances following 13 villagers' deaths in small Northumberland hamlet. Deaths coinciding with eldest son's marriage. With this knowledge weighing on her, Evelyn became obsessed with understanding family's true history and the role she had unwittingly played in whatever transpired on her wedding day. She began experiencing episodes speaking languages she had never studied, reciting what seemed portions of missing book text. These episodes left her exhausted and frightened with no memory of what she had said. With Ezekiel gone and no other immediate family present at wedding, Evelyn's siblings deemed too young to attend and staying with Charlottesville relatives, Thorne estate fell to Evelyn as eldest child. She and James found themselves sudden stewards of vast wealth and property, a position bringing little comfort under circumstances. James, for his part, struggled with guilt and helplessness. His family, parents, siblings, cousins, had all been among vanished guests. Every night he relived disappearance moment, questioning if something could have been done, some way he could have saved them. His mother's face vision, frozen in horror as she slid across floor toward that impossible reality terror, haunted his dreams and often woke him screaming at night. Despite personal traumas, both James and Evelyn cooperated fully with ongoing investigation. They recounted events countless times to increasingly skeptical authorities, never wavering in account despite incredulity with which it was received. They provided access to every Thorne Manor part, every document, every potential clue shedding light on mystery. As months passed with no resolution, public case fascination began waning. Investigation remained open but inactive. Newlyweds were left to forge life together in inexplicable tragedy's shadow. They chose not to remain at Thorne Manor. The house stood empty, its rooms silent witnesses to whatever transpired that October evening. Local legends quickly took root, stories of lights seen in windows at night, spectral music drifting across grounds on wedding anniversary, travelers venturing too close disappearing without trace. James and Evelyn moved first to Richmond, then farther north to Philadelphia, seeking anonymity and fresh start. They had 3 children in following years, 2 sons and a daughter. Though acquaintances noted Evelyn was never quite same after wedding day events. A certain melancholy hung about her, deepening as she aged. She developed obsessive spiritualism interest, attending seances and consulting mediums desperately attempting to contact vanished father and learn truth. James devoted himself to family and building new business far removed from Thorne Holdings, eventually sold. He rarely spoke of wedding day, but friends reported chronic nightmares. On particularly bad nights, he would wake screaming about green light and faces melting into smoke. The mystery might have faded entirely from public memory had it not been for startling development 23 years later in 1894. Routine railway line excavation near Millborough Springs uncovered a mass grave less than 2 miles from former Thorne Manor site. Within grave were remains of exactly 108 individuals. Coroner's examination revealed several puzzling details. First, despite 2 decades burial, bodies showed minimal decomposition. Flesh had desiccated but not rotted, giving corpses appearance more like Egyptian mummies than typical remains of that age. Second, none bore obvious cause of death. No wounds, no disease or poisoning signs. It was as if they had simply stopped living at exact same moment. Most disturbing of all, each corpse wore expression of abject terror, mouths frozen in silent screams, hands curled into claws as if desperately fighting unseen force. Clothing and personal effects identified remains as missing wedding guests. Ezekiel Thorne was among them, distinguished by signet ring and silver watch his own father had given upon his 21st birthday. Unlike others, his expression showed not terror but something closer to rapture, lips drawn back in what might have been smile or final gasp. Discovery caused press sensation. Newspapers nationwide carried headlines about Thorne wedding mystery and Virginia burial pit. Spiritualists and scientists alike descended on Bath County, each eager to investigate phenomenon according to their methodologies. News reached James and Evelyn in Philadelphia. James immediately traveled to Virginia, assisting identification and arranging proper burials for Sullivan family members among victims. Evelyn, however, refused to return. By this time, mental state had deteriorated significantly. Found bodies news pushed her over edge she had teetered on for years. In days following James' Virginia departure, those close to Evelyn noticed alarming behavioral changes. She became feverishly active, sorting through old papers, making cryptic journal notations, and speaking urgently about completing the circle and the 100th bride's duty. Her oldest son, Thomas, named for grandfather he had never met, reported she had begun sleepwalking, always following same pattern, standing at whatever room's center, and extending arms as if opening invisible door. On night James was due returning from Virginia, Evelyn locked herself in bedroom and opened veins in bathtub. She left behind note containing just 7 words, "The 100th bride must complete the circle." Her suicide added final tragic chapter to already haunting story. James was devastated, forced to bury wife of 23 years alongside arranging funerals for long-missing parents and siblings. Their children, 2 sons and daughter, were left grappling with not only mother's suicide but also infamous mystery resurgence shadowing family names since before they were born. Body's discovery and Evelyn's subsequent suicide reignited public case interest. New investigations launched, employing centuries and more advanced forensic techniques. Mass grave soil samples analyzed. Strange decomposition lack studied by medical experts. Thorne family history scrutinized more thoroughly than ever before. These investigations yielded disturbing connections overlooked in original inquiry. Thorne lineage, it emerged, had unusual wedding patterns stretching generations. Every 3rd generation, a Thorne bride or groom wed during October full moon. And following each such wedding, local records showed unexplained disappearance clusters in surrounding communities. Ezekiel's grandfather, Josiah Thorne, had married October 26, 1811. In week following his wedding, 7 neighboring farm people vanished without explanation. His great-grandfather, Caleb Thorne, married October 18, 1751. Entire merchant vessel crew docked in Chesapeake Bay, 12 men total, disappeared wedding celebration night. Further investigation revealed even older incidents, more difficult verifying but consistent with pattern. Thorne family, it seemed, had been marked by mysterious disappearances since American colonies' arrival in mid-1600s. And before that, genealogical records traced origins to small northern English village where similar legends surrounded family for centuries. Most significant was discovery of 100th bride references in Thorne family correspondence dating to 1729. A letter from Obadiah Thorne to his son contained cryptic warning. "Remember the count continues unbroken. Each union brings us closer to the 100th bride when our covenant will be fulfilled and our sacrifice rewarded." Mathematicians and genealogists collaborated analyzing Thorne family tree. Counting every direct line marriage and specific branch marriages occurring on October full moons, they determined Evelyn had indeed been 100th bride in sequence stretching almost 3 centuries. But what covenant, what sacrifice, what reward? These questions remained unanswered, full truth hidden behind veil separating known world from whatever lies beyond. As 19th century gave way to 20th, vanishing wedding guests case gradually receded once more into legend realm. Sullivan children changed surname, distancing themselves from notoriety. Thorn Manor was eventually demolished after mysterious origin fire gutted main house in 1902, leaving only stone foundation and single chimney standing like accusing finger pointed at sky. Land reclaimed by forest. Nature quickly erasing physical evidence of human habitation. Only family cemetery remained, surrounded by high wrought iron fence and rarely visited except by those with morbid fascination for macabre. The story might have been forgotten entirely if not for curious incident in 1921. A historian named Dr. Malcolm Pierce, researching Virginia's Unsolved Mysteries book, visited former Thorn Manor site on October 15, exactly 50 years after infamous wedding. Dr. Pierce was a skeptic, scienceman who had made reputation debunking supernatural claims with logical explanations and careful research. He had planned to spend night camping on property, hoping to demonstrate that strange anniversary phenomena reports were nothing more than suggestible minds influenced by compelling legend. He was never seen again. His equipment found abandoned near house ruins, camera with unexposed film, journal containing detailed thorn case notes, and curious sketch of what appeared doorway standing open in empty air with shadowy figures emerging from within. His journal's last entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting beginning in Pierce's usual meticulous script but deteriorating into barely legible scrawl by final lines, read, "The circle is not closed. It waits still. I can hear them whispering beneath earth. They say another bride must come. The door opens both ways. God help us all." Thorough area search yielded nothing. Pierce's University of Virginia colleagues, where he had been respected American history professor, offered rewards for discovery information. Spiritualists claimed spirit contact, reporting he was beyond veil but unwilling or unable to describe location more specifically. Eventually, like original wedding guests, Pierce became another footnote in expanding Thorn Manor legend, another life swallowed by whatever darkness lingered on that isolated Virginia hillside. This final disappearance cemented Thorn wedding legend in American folklore annals. Various adaptations appeared in ghost story collections and around campfires. Hollywood produced loosely inspired 1950s film bearing little resemblance to actual events. Truth became increasingly obscured by embellishment and sensationalism. Yet for those willing digging deeper, sifting historical fact from supernatural fiction, core mystery remains as compelling as unsettling. 108 people vanished instantly from sealed room. Their bodies appeared 23 years later, inexplicably preserved and bearing unspeakable terror expressions. And throughout runs thread of ancient covenant, generational countdown, and circle that somehow, despite everything, remains incomplete. What truly happened at Thorn Sullivan wedding? Was it, as skeptics maintain, elaborate hoax orchestrated by Ezekiel Thorn, final revenge act against man stealing his daughter, culminating in mass murder by some undetectable poison? Was it, as some theologians suggest, divine retribution for generations of secret sin? Or was it something far older and more terrible, a pact with forces beyond human understanding, temporarily fulfilled but eternally hungry? Answers, if they exist, are lost to history. Principles long dead, physical evidence scattered or destroyed, written records fragmented and contradictory. All that remains is story itself, cautionary tale of ambition, forbidden love, and terrible price paid when ancient boundaries crossed. Perhaps it's better we don't know full truth. Some mysteries once solved reveal horrors human mind was never meant to comprehend. Some doors once opened can never truly close again. Yet for those drawn to darkness, questions persist. What was Thorn family covenant's nature? What power demanded such specific sacrifice? The 100th bride, assembled witnesses, and most chilling of all, If circle remains unclosed as vanished historian believed, what further price will be exacted to complete it? These questions have echoed through decades since that fateful 1871 day when a kiss sealed not only marriage but over 100 souls' fate. They whisper still among overgrown ruins where Thorn Manor once stood proud against Virginia's sky. They rustle in old newspaper pages and county records. They haunt dreams of those delving too deeply into story. For curious and brave, trail begins in Bath County, Virginia archives, where original investigation reports gathered dust in forgotten files. It continues in University of Virginia Library Special Collections, where Ezekiel Thorne's strange book fragments are preserved under glass, having resurfaced in 1967 in private collectors' possession who donated them anonymously after experiencing what he described as visitations leaving him unable to sleep. Trail winds through crumbling churchyards where some recovered bodies were laid to rest, their gravestones bearing only names and shared death date, October 15, 1871. But warning to those pursuing this mystery. According to local legend, anyone getting too close to truth begins dreaming of grand ballroom filled with smiling guests, of green light pouring through high windows, and of faces melting like wax as unseen door opens onto endless night. And on October nights when moon full and veil between worlds grows thin, string music sounds reportedly can be heard in forest where Thorn Manor once stood. The melody sweet at first, enticing, drawing listener deeper among trees. But those following too far report tune gradually changing, becoming discordant and strange until sounding less like music and more like screams. Some doors best left closed. Some kisses should remain ungiven. Some circles safer left incomplete. But Thorn wedding story endures, whisper passed generation to generation, shadow refusing to fade with time passage. And somewhere, perhaps, those 108 guest spirits still gather at eternal reception, trapped between moments, waiting for resolution that may never come. Or perhaps they wait for 101st bride and final circle closing begun centuries ago with desperate bargain made by first Thorn setting foot on American soil, bargain written in blood and sealed with kiss. This tale's most disturbing aspect perhaps is its cyclical nature. Every 50 years since original incident, strange occurrences reported near former Thorn property vicinity. In 1921, historian vanished. In 1971, college student group camping near ruins reported seeing green glow among trees and hearing wedding music on wind. 2 wandered off investigating and were never seen again. And now, as 2021 approaches, one might wonder what anniversary will bring. Already, locals report unusual area activity, electronic devices malfunctioning, animals behaving erratically, strange lights glimpse through trees on moonless nights. Few remaining families connected to original event descendants report dreams of wedding invitations written in green ink arriving in envelopes sealed with wax bearing Thorn family crest. Is it merely suggestion, compelling story power influencing susceptible minds? Or is something stirring in Virginia hills, preparing once more to open door that should remain forever closed? Sleep well, dear viewers. And if you should dream tonight of wedding bells and vanishing guests, remember, it's only a story, isn't it? This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, keep to light and beware shadows where older things still hunger. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me for more informative content like this.